In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
All right. Well, hello, Sublation Media viewers and magazine readers. Welcome to the Sublation Magazine Show, Sublation Media's weekly live stream in which we speak with authors and discuss some of the issues of the day and the relevance of the news cycle to the left. I'm Douglas Lain.
And I'm Ashley Frawley.
Before we begin, I would like to ask you all to like and subscribe and hit the bell. Also, make sure you keep up to date with Sublation Magazine's latest content by following us on Twitter and Facebook. And if you like what we do, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Links are in the description. Also, if you feel so inclined, you can drop us a super chat as we go. And when we get a super chat, we sometimes, most often, try to answer the questions that might be attached to them. We have a great show in which we'll be talking about the FBI's search of former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago home, the historical context for that search, and what the implications are for the left.
And we'll also be discussing the history of the struggle for civil rights and civil liberty with Freddie deBoer, whose recent essay in Sublation Magazine was entitled Abortion and the Legacy of the Civil War. deBoer characterized the recent overturning of Roe v. Wade as an attack on bodily autonomy and self-ownership. He claimed that the Supreme Court's decision endangered the legacy of self-ownership established at the expense of hundreds of thousands of lives in the Civil War.
Yep, but let's start by talking about the FBI's search of former President Trump's home.
Okay, so I've got my dog here.
Oh, yeah?
Sorry.
Okay.
It's got nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I just have to bring my dog here.
Oh, nice.
Because
what kind of dog is that, Ashley?
The most annoying Jack Russell on the planet, and he keeps bumping my table.
Oh, okay.
Because he's desperate for pets, so I'm really sorry.
That's okay.
I keep bouncing around. I really apologize.
What's the dog's name?
The dog's name is Marks.
Marks? Well, what does Marks think about Donald Trump's and the FBI's raid of Donald Trump's home?
Obviously, he's very annoyed about it because he keeps knocking my laptop off my my makeshift desk that I've got going on here. So yeah, if you want to see Marks again, you can drop us a super chat. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Drop a super chat to see Marks again. Okay, so
right. On August 8th, the Federal Bureau of Investigation executed a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. That's obviously the home of Donald Trump in Palm Beach, Florida. And the Fed seized 11 sets of apparently classified documents, including what have been reported to be top secret documents. The warrant was issued so that the FBI could investigate whether the former president had committed 3 possible federal crimes: the removal of government records, concealing government records relevant to a federal investigation, and violating the Espionage Act by retaining national defense information without authorization. Now, Trump has, of course, denied these charges. He said a lot of random and conflicting things. He claimed initially that, he claimed that it was all a hoax, or like that everything was planted. And then he said, I declassified the documents. Then that the documents were privileged and included communication between himself and his attorneys and so on.
Yeah, the question of whether the documents are declassified is a technical one, and it's not easy to parse. To begin with, the president has the authority to declassify documents, and Trump apparently did at least gesture towards declassification of documents that, at least theoretically, could be among those seized by the FBI. In an October of 2020 tweet, he said, "I have fully authorized the total declassification of any and all documents pertaining to the single greatest political crime in American history, the Russia hoax. Likewise, the Hillary Clinton email scandal. No redactions." Declassification by tweet is unorthodox and maybe a little absurd, but depending upon how one defines executive power, it might be adequate. Even if it is, it could be a violation of the rules setting up the processes for declassification. There's no criminal penalty applicable to such violation. According to the New York Times, breaking classification rules can bring disciplinary measures in the form of admonishment, a fine, or even termination. But breaking these bureaucratic rules in and of itself is not a crime. However, according to Newsweek and The Atlantic, there are some documents that are classified by statute and that even a president can't declassify. Nuclear secrets, for instance, might be protected even from the president. The key charge appears to me, though, to be that Trump has violated the Espionage Act. However, that would appear to hinge upon whether Trump either leaked or intended to leak classified information. And again, as president, he was empowered to decide what counted as classified for the most part and what should be made public. Unlike Julian Assange or Edward Snowden, Trump was in a position to make classified material public material in the eyes of the government. He's also empowered to decide what information should be shared with foreign powers. I think he could have, for instance, decided to give the North Koreans military secrets and, as a representative of the people, be well within his rights. Those are the sorts of decisions the president is empowered to make as the chief executive. So, for example, in 2017, many speculated that Trump might have committed an act of treason when he shared top secret information about airline security with a Russian ambassador. However, as the chief executive, he was empowered to share that information. Still, now that Trump is no longer president, if he was planning on sharing documents that were still classified, that would probably count as espionage.
But stepping away from legal questions and technicalities and thinking politically, it's worth noting what Matt Taibbi, did I say that name correctly?
Yeah, Matt Taibbi.
Yeah, a journalist formerly with Rolling Stone magazine and now writing on Substack, wrote after the raid. This for sure is a huge story, he writes, and its hugeness extends in multiple directions, including the extraordinary political risk inherent in the decision to execute the raid. If it backfires, if underlying this action there isn't a very substantial the Biden administration just took the world's most reputable police force and turned it into an American version of the Tonton Macoute on national television. Again, I'm not sure if I said that correctly. This is what happens when you read a lot but don't say things out loud.
Right.
But Tonton Macoute was a special operations unit created by Haitian dictator Francois Duvalier. It was basically like a goon squad led by a warlord, and this is what's become of the United States. Yeah, the FBI. So the last presidential candidate to be subjected to a search by the FBI was Eugene Debs, and he was charged with espionage after he gave a speech encouraging people not to fight or not to serve in the First World War. And of course, he was running for president in 1920 in the 1920 election. What everyone might think about Trump, the use of the Espionage Act to justify a police search of a former president is a major development and one that should concern those of us on the left who want to develop an independent socialist political movement. However, the contents of the documents during the search are still unknown and the reasons behind it are unclear. Those of us on the left, especially socialists, will have to try to remember to think independently and resist partisan propaganda from all sides as the justifications and excuses for potential misconduct by the former president will be unrelenting.
All right. So, we have a couple minutes here before we bring on Freddie deBoer. We went through what, we officially wrote down to say, but what do you feel about this FBI raid, Ashley?
Well, I don't know about you, Doug, but I was just speaking off the top of my head. I didn't make any. No, I mean, obviously, it's not a good thing. And it also speaks of this. I mean, obviously you want to, if you're like suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, this is great, right? Like final nail in the coffin. This might be it. This might be the finally, after so many threats, this might be the time they actually get him. But I don't really have faith that the FBI, I don't know, is really out there in the interests of the people. The United States has more classified information than unclassified information. They are not exactly committed to like open debate in a democratic society. So I highly doubt that this is just actions of a concerned FBI for the good of the people. I mean, obviously, the role of the president in the United States is to be a salesman for the ruling class. And contrary to popular belief, Trump was a really bad salesman, and we can't really have that happening again. That's my take on it.
You know,
that's what those in power, I'm sure, are thinking. To be clear,
when you think about this in the larger context of similar incidents, you know, the first examples that come up would be like the Hillary Clinton server with her emails when she was Secretary of State, and the other example that comes to mind that maybe not as quickly is the Valerie Plame affair with Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney outed a CIA operative in order to basically punish her husband, who had been speaking out in the run up to the invasion of Iraq. So that was a moment where it was pretty well confirmed that Cheney had threatened or undermined national security in the name of a political vendetta. And that didn't lead to any, indictment or investigation or search. There are other examples. General Petraeus was sharing secret documents with his mistress, and he was punished for that. He was put on probation and given a $200,000 fine. But the truth of this is that the idea that being fast and loose and playing politics with classified documents, being unique to Trump, that just isn't the case. So that doesn't justify Trump's behavior, whatever it might be. But so far, there have been no allegations that rise to the level of what Dick Cheney was known to have done in the Valerie Plame affair. And rather, from what I've heard, it seems to be more on the level of what Hillary Clinton had been accused of with her email server. Because, in that case, it wasn't physical documents taken, by hand and put in a safe, but there were emails stored on a private server, but they were classified documents. And she was empowered as well to declassify documents. And the question was, had she declassified them? What steps needed to be taken to declassify the documents? And the FBI again was politically motivated, and it appears to have been weirdly politically motivated in its treatment of Hillary Clinton. I don't know. It just seems like a continuation of the politicization of the FBI, which has probably always been a force that's, the kind of the political arm of whatever ruling elite happens to be dominant in Washington.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it's always going to be politically motivated because there's such an enormous amount of classified data, and the rules surrounding, classification and declassification are so arcane that someone is bound to make mistakes, right? And people make mistakes all the time. And when they choose to kind of bring these to light, it's clearly politically motivated.
Yeah. Spencer Leonard says there's no comparison. He's the editor-in-chief of Sublation Magazine. So he says there's no comparison between Petraeus and Trump because Trump was president. And that is true. The general didn't have the power and authority to declassify documents in the same way Trump did. And also, Trump apparently did not share or has not been accused of sharing any of the classified material at all, let alone with Stormy Daniels or someone like that. I don't know what's going to happen next. I guess my biggest concern would just be that most of all that the left would lose sight of its commitments, and instead embrace the center liberal, I guess you could say liberal wing of the Democratic Party and following their propaganda in an effort to appear anti-Trump enough. But I think it's important to say, no, we don't want the FBI to be going about enforcing the Espionage Act politically or probably at all. And we don't think that the former president needs to be beaten by law enforcement. Let's just beat him politically. I mean, we can do it. So that's a very good actually point to close on as well, because
I feel like, especially with Trump, it sort of dealt a blow to this idea that democracy is a good thing, on the left, where it's like, oh, people start to go back to these horrible, very bad arguments where it's like, oh, well, if we'd only clamped down on free speech and democracy in the 1930s, we'd never had Hitler.
Right.
If only we had been better about clamping down on rights, fascism never would have happened, So people start to get, they start to put their hopes into these sort of extra, these parties that will kind of save us from ourselves in a way. And that's a really dangerous path to go down.
Yeah, people want to use the power of an authoritarian state to fight the rising nationalist, fascist, authoritarian tendencies that are rising up around the world, and it just won't work. But maybe I can let Freddie get his 2 cents in on this question before we ask him about his article for Sublation Magazine, which again was entitled "Abortion and the Legacy of the Civil War." Let's bring him in. Hey, Freddie, how you doing?
Hello.
Hi,
I'm going to read your bio. You are the author of The Cult of Smart, and you've written for The New Yorker, Jacobin, Current Affairs, and of course, most prestigiously and most importantly, for Sublation Magazine. So thank you, Freddie.
I've written for The New York Times, not The New Yorker.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Fine. I'll change that.
One of those similarly snooty publications.
Yeah. Actually, that is better. The New Yorker is the best place to land some of your fiction, which you do apparently might be having a novel come out. You told me that before.
Well, we shall see. We're not going to count our chickens, but
all right. Well, good luck on that. And so do you have anything you want to say about the Mar-a-Lago and FBI and all of that? Any comments on what our commentary was? Disagree? Agree?
I just think that it's easy to be too clever with this. If he's guilty of crimes, he should be arrested and prosecuted for them, right? If he's not guilty of crimes, then we should attempt to defeat him at the ballot box. I understand the impulse some people have to say, like, if he's removed from 2024 consideration because of prosecution, then a lot of conservatives will see it as cheating, and it'll speak to their narrative about how liberals and the Democrats just have to break the rules in order to win, et cetera, et cetera. But basic, reality is that we do live under a particular rule of law, as broken and biased as it is. And I think that if he is guilty of committing crimes, and I think he probably is guilty of committing crimes because he's an enormously mentally incapacitated person. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he broke the law by accident. He should be charged and tried in a way that is consistent with the rule of law. And, he is a candidate with some unique weaknesses, but also with some unique strengths. He's been underestimated before as a political adversary, and running against Ron DeSantis will in some ways be easier, in some ways be harder. But, we should stand by the principle that nobody is above the rule of law, even when the optics might be imperfect. Well,
in this case, the question of the illegality of him taking these documents is an open one, right? As we went over, and so the law that he would have been violating, most likely, from what I've read so far, and this could change, would be the Espionage Act. But the other, which is a law which I don't support as a socialist,
right.
It was the last time it was used against a presidential candidate was Eugene Debs. It's been used most recently to lock away Julian Assange. Edward Snowden had to flee the country, on and on and on. Chelsea Manning, is another person charged and imprisoned under the Espionage Act. So if it was the Espionage Act that he was charged with, I wouldn't say, oh, no one's above the law. I would say there's something wrong with this law. But the other thing, though, is there's a possibility that the FBI will find evidence of illegality from the search, that this was a fishing expedition, and that the pretext for the search warrant will be irrelevant after they find out that he was taking bribes from 100 different foreign powers or officials or corporations or what have you. And at that point, would you say, okay, well, despite how the search was justified originally, no one's above the law?
I mean, look, like, I think you can easily take that observation and turn it in the complete opposite direction, right? Would we really want someone who, like a Trump, to be exempt from the same law that is currently punishing Julian Assange, right? In other words, I don't like the law any more than you do, right? But it's a weird stance for leftists to want to have someone like Assange, who is some kind of leftist at least, and who's being prosecuted and persecuted because he did things that are consonant with left-wing values. It seems strange to me to think that he should continue to be persecuted under the Espionage Act, while Donald Trump isn't. And also, I just don't like Donald Trump. I mean, I guess my basic assumption is just that the law is almost always a tool of injustice. The question is like, it does exist, and it has certain facets that can occasionally be used for our ends. And I don't particularly think I'd be crying any tears over Donald Trump, his sort of reign of terror being brought to an end by the Espionage Act. Would I snap my fingers and get rid of the Espionage Act right now? Yes, I would, if I had the ability to do so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about what you wrote for the magazine, abortion and the legacy of the Civil War. In your essay, you point to the right to self-ownership as being the fundamental right, fundamental to the right to an abortion. In other words, that the right to an abortion is founded on self-ownership. It's a right founded upon the rights of labor, which are the foundational property rights in a free society. The right to one's own self and to one's labor is the most essential right to property that we have. Why do you say that overturning Roe versus Wade puts those rights, or the right to own oneself, into jeopardy?
Yeah, I think that that ownership of the self is a right that sort of precludes or predates all other rights, right? I mean, it doesn't make much sense to speak about a right to free speech or assembly, or to own a gun, or to a fair trial, etc., if self-ownership, like literally the dominion over yourself, including like the physical body, if that thing doesn't exist, right? It has to exist as a pretext, as a sort of pre-political right that the foundation of all other rights can be built upon. And one of the things that I was trying to do in that essay is, I'm someone who thinks that there's a very annoying legalism that gets attached to abortion discussions, that so often, because abortion has been a legal issue primarily since Roe v. Wade, because abortion has been adjudicated in courts and also in public opinion in legalistic terms, that a lot of people miss the forest for the trees. I had some people respond to the piece by saying, well, you don't actually think that what happened in the Civil War amounts to a legal precedent that defends the right to abortion in the same way that other legal precedents in courtrooms establish legal precedent. And I said, no, I don't. I think it's something much deeper and more important than that. In other words, if, for example, there is a splinter of the pro-choice movement, which is sort of pro-choice but anti-Roe. The New York Times ran a op-ed by a Yale professor from a couple months ago that argued that Roe was poorly argued, even though it arrived at the right decision. And I just don't care about that at all, right? Like, in other words, the legal precedent is just not meaningful to me, because what's much more important is like the moral principle. So what I'm trying to do with that essay is to sort of, relocate the conversation at the idea not of the sort of precise legalese that has been chopped up and divided into a million different ways in the past 50 years of arguing about Roe, but to say, okay, what are the pre-legal sort of human rights, and that extend not from a sort of narrowly legalistic perspective of the self and who owns it, but in a more holistic and humanistic sense of, we have these particular rights, including the right to own the body. You can think about it in terms of what does the right to free speech mean if the right to bodily autonomy is not first guaranteed? You can't speak freely, right, if you don't literally own yourself. If another human being can own you, if you can become subservient to the desires of another human being, then you don't really have the right to free speech. What does the right to free assembly mean if you don't have the right to bodily autonomy? If another person can own you and prevent you from attending assembly, then you have no right to free assembly. You have no right to own a weapon if somebody else owns you, can prevent you from doing so. So before you can even talk about other rights, natural rights, human rights, universal rights, you have to talk about a right to the self.
Okay, so I'm interested in what you said about the, rejecting the legalistic wrangling over the Supreme Court's decision, because for you, the moral principle is more significant than the legal case or the technicalities around abortion. And I the sentiment seems right to me, but then I start to get, I don't know, I maybe a little confused or a little concerned, because moral principles, in order to become enacted, you could enact those principles politically, I suppose. You could enact those principles through the courts, through the Constitution, and then the interpretation of the Constitution in the United States. So, like, it should, if we're talking about the state, the state should be led to either pass laws based on the moral principle, or to come to legal decisions based on the law, which is then shaped by the moral principle through the Constitution, right? I mean, do you think that interpreting the Constitution correctly and having a Constitution is an important thing for a republic, for democratic society?
I mean, look, you're going to have some sort of document that codifies all of this stuff. I'm not advocating for an anarchist society in which there just isn't a sort of set of legal rights that are delineated somewhere in paper. But I am saying that, and obviously the degree to which we sort of suss out and fight out what amounts to the basic rights of being human are always going to be a matter of debate that people will disagree about quite vociferously. But what I am saying is that, I mean, look, it's been pointed out since the fall of Roe that the Democrats have had several opportunities in the past 50 years to codify in law a federal right that guarantees a right to an abortion that would have preempted Roe. Okay. In other words, for example, Barack Obama enjoyed a filibuster-proof majority, and the Democrats could have. That's the only reason that Obamacare was able to exist. The Democrats could have, at that point, pushed forward a national legal codification of abortion that would have made legal challenges to Roe irrelevant, right? They didn't do so, apparently, because they didn't want to upset the apple cart, and because they felt like, well, Roe's the law of the land and it's settled law. And when we have these Senate hearings for potential Supreme Court nominees, we always ask them the question of whether Roe is settled law, and they say yes. So we're not gonna upset the apple cart. But of course, then the apple cart got upset for them, right? Yeah. And so, like, that sort of contingent history where the Democrats could have, at several different times in the past 50 years, codified this law into this right into federal law, but just didn't because of quotidian political concerns, is a good example with like why legalistic defenses will always be insufficient, right? Because what's legal and what is in law is always going to be subject to the weird fickleness of history and path dependence and all kinds of minor, you have these. There was a senator who switched from being an independent to caucusing with the Democrats, whose name I can't remember now, but he ended up playing an important role in the fight for Obamacare, etc. These kind of things are so arbitrary and so chancy that I don't see the value in constantly defining rights in legalistic terms. You have to go deeper and go to the actual roots and the foundations of, what underlies all of it. And I do think that one of the things that the Civil War established, with the costs of hundreds of thousands of American lives, is that the individual has a sovereignty over the body, and that is something that is such an essential right and such an essential part of our basic conception of what it means to be a free person and a citizen, that we were willing to tear the country apart for it. And I think that sort of conception should not be lightly discarded in favor of a kind of legalism that look, it's always going to exist. There's always going to be laws in the Constitution, and we're always going to be interpreting things in that light. But we should not consent to defining things constantly in legalistic terms simply because that's the way that it's done. I think that has cost the left a lot and has made us less powerful than we could have been.
Well, actually, one of the responses that we had to your article was that bodily autonomy is not actually by comparing bodily autonomy and free labor, you're kind of making a conflation that's unjustified. That is with self-ownership. So, there are lots of things that you don't have the ability to do. You can't, you in most states, you can't even commit suicide. This would be, you can't even sort of kill yourself. You can't get certain surgeries or medical procedures that would be prohibited by law. So bodily autonomy doesn't necessarily mean that you have like total free control over your body, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that doesn't preclude the prohibition of abortion necessarily, because there's lots of things that are nonetheless prohibited.
And yet I oppose those as well, right? The federal law prohibits me from using marijuana, and that is a threat to my bodily autonomy, and that's also illegitimate. The prohibition against suicide is also, in my mind, illegitimate. I think everyone has the right to end their life if they want to. Everyone has the right to do and to take whatever drugs they want to have whatever kind of radical surgery that they can arrange to have performed on them. I mean, all these things it's true that there are sort of impediments legally right now to those expressions of bodily autonomy, but they don't impress me as a matter of moral value. And when people sort of talk in this way, they inevitably end up saying, well, you don't have the bodily autonomy to punch another person. But of course, that is the definition of the end of all rights, right? When one person's rights start to intercede on somebody else's because that person enjoys the bodily autonomy to not get punched in the face, right? I'm working within a system in which most of my values are certainly not currently legally codified. But the purpose of the piece is to call for a deeper and more moral-based vision of what it means to make legal demands, right? Like the demand for a legal abortion within a framework of morality that supersedes legality and is bigger than legality.
We're going to get to the probably standard question about, when does someone have the right to punch someone in the face, or when is punching not punching, or, basically comparing the rights of the fetus to the rights of the woman. We'll get to that in just a minute. But what I want to kind of explore with you for a moment, if I can, is the question of where the right to bodily autonomy is situated. What is not just the moral principle behind it, but what is like the mediating material relationship behind it? Like, what kind of society are we in where that is so fundamental? Because again, like at the outset, I said, it was the rights of labor to own themselves that set up the right to bodily autonomy, and really is a foundation for all property rights in a free republic. So it's a society like it's a capitalist society based on free labor, free in so much as they have the right to sell their time and in exchange for a wage. And to anyone they choose. They don't have to stay on the Lord's land. They don't have to pay a rent to the Lord. They can move freely. They can find anyone to work for. That's the freedom that workers have, and that's the kind of autonomy and property rights that are foundational. So, if we think about the abortion issue in those terms, would it be fair to say, maybe not on a moral basis, but on a social basis, that society has some claim over the woman's body, because the bodily autonomy you're talking about when it comes to abortion cuts against the right of society to have a labor force, to have this is I feel like I've gone off track in this question, but I'm going to stick with this question this way, because this is how it's coming out. But does society have some right there, in relationship to creating conditions for work to be done, and then to impose limits on bodily autonomy in order to ensure that the capital reproduces itself.
Well, let's frame this in terms of labor rights then, if that makes it easier for us, right?
Yeah.
Pregnancy is labor, right? I mean, pregnancy entails an immense amount of work, right? You're putting your body through, in the most sort of direct sense, you're putting your body through an amount of physical labor that it would not otherwise be undertaking through pregnancy. I think that, does society have the right to create the conditions where people labor? I think the answer to that is clearly no, if you actually follow the Civil War to its logical endpoints, because the Civil War was fought under the condition of people being forced to labor, right, for no compensation. I think most of us would reject the idea that you should be able to do that even if you provide compensation. In other words, that if you say someone has to go and work at McDonald's or wherever else and accept a certain wage for it, the fact of the wage doesn't change the fact that this is essentially slavery, right? In fact, we have a whole vocabulary for wage slavery. Mm-hmm. Let's ditch the fetus for a second. Okay, let's think about this. Let's say a completely adult, fully formed, autonomous human being. Say that there is a scenario where you're a young woman and there's another person, a stranger to you, who is an adult with the full faculties of the mind and the intellect, who it is discovered has a rare medical condition. And the only way that person can survive is if they are temporarily grafted onto a young woman who has not chosen to be in that position, and that person will live in a parasitic state with that young woman for 9 months. And in the process of that 9 months, it will amount to a great deal of work for her. It will permanently change her body in many ways, and it will risk her life in doing so. So should we as a society force that woman to undergo that parasitic relationship to save another life? I would argue that we should not. That even if that person is an adult and a human with all the other rights of being human, that is such a vast imposition on the basic right of a human being to own themselves, that would violate justice. Now, would it be a good thing for that person to do, for that young woman to do, to let another person live as a parasite attached to them for 9 months in a way that it takes immense labor, that permanently alters their body, that changes their hormones and moods, and that threatens their life? It may very well, we might argue that it is the right thing to do, but I think many people would reject the idea that that she should have a legal responsibility to do so, and that's what abortion is, right? The abortion debate is all about, right? Pregnancy is a state of parasitism in which one creature can only live thanks to the largesse of another creature, and in that state, the person who is the host, the mother, is someone who endures tremendous physical labor, who endures extreme emotional swings and hormonal changes to their behavior, who goes through permanent body alteration through this process, and who is in very real sense threatened with their life by some of the conditions that can develop. I think that I would not want to live in a society where the person was forced to be able to maintain that parasitic relationship. And so I think that the concept of, oh, we don't know where the fetus becomes a human and we don't know what the cutoff date is, it's just not relevant to me, because it presumes that the problem is that the tricky moral question is whether the parasitic agent is a human or not. Call it a human. I still don't want the government to be forcing someone to be living in that parasitic relationship.
And in fact, there's previous case law that undermines what you've just said, which I talked about previously on an episode of this show, which is McCall v. Shimp, where a man was actually in not exactly this situation, but very similar kind of situation, where he was the only person who could give I can't remember exactly what the organ was, but a donation to a close relative. And that donation was needed to save that person's life, but he refused to do it. And the judgment was that while this is morally reprehensible, you cannot force someone to give a part of their body to someone else, even if it will save their life. That doing so would undermine one of the most fundamental rights, which is to bodily autonomy. And the damage to society would be much greater than the damage done in this particular situation of allowing this person the right to refuse. And now when it comes, but this was a man, right? So it was like, well, of course, of course we can't force a man to do that. But ladies, you're supposed to be nice. And so when it comes to women, that's not even a question. That's not even one of the questions that we ask. It's all about, well, when does this become a person? Because of course you have the obligation as a woman to do this. But if you want to have equality and treat men and women the same, then you have to recognize that a fundamental right to bodily autonomy is indeed being trespassed here in a way that you would not do for a man,
Right.
and haven't done in previous case law as well.
There's also the
Can I interject?
Sorry.
I'm being compelled. I went to a Catholic school for a couple of years. I don't know what's happening to me right now, so I want to apologize in advance for what I'm about to say. But look, you can't leave. You talk about morality, right? This is based on some sort of moral principle. You can't leave sexual morality out of this equation. Having sex comes along with the potential to create the conditions that we're talking about, the conditions where someone is parasitically attached to you. And somebody has sex and that's the result, it's a different situation than somebody who happens to be in a condition where they aren't able to support themselves on their own and could use the access to the body of someone else. You're starting from an action which everyone knows can lead to pregnancy, and that creates different sets of moral responsibilities than the other, like the violinist attached through blood transfusion to a random other patient.
But what you're saying is to emphasize the very arbitrariness of what we're talking about, because for some people, getting pregnant is a lot of work. There are many couples who labor very hard with all the weight of medical science for years before they're able to conceive of a child. And some people have one mistake when they're both drunk and it results in a pregnancy, right? One of the things that makes some of these anti-abortion bills so disturbing is because they set limits to when a woman can have an abortion that are so early in their period that most women would never, in the pregnancy, that most women would probably not even notice that they were late until after the point in which they could legally abort their baby. Many women have irregular periods. It's not at all unusual for many women to go a month having skipped their period and then getting it later, right? And so what you're doing when you say, well, hey, this is you make a choice to have sex, you have to understand that there's so much luck of the draw, and there's so much in pregnancy that is the product of very arbitrary physiological forces, that you're asking people to be able to make major decisions about what's happening with their body based on things that are arbitrary and change from person to person. Some people have a one-night stand, they get pregnant. Some people have regularly irregular periods and are not able to be aware that they've become pregnant for over a month after the pregnancy has begun, etc. So I don't know, Doug. It just seems to me that, like, to simply say, "Oh, well, you had sex, you knew what you were getting into," is unfair, because we don't actually know what we're getting into when we have sex. Many people have unprotected sex without producing a pregnancy. Some people have problems where they try to have protected sex with the condom breaks or whatever, and they end up with pregnant. I mean, so much of this is arbitrary, and it seems to me to be quite unfair to foist off onto people the extreme consequences of pregnancy based on a scenario that is often so chancy for anyone.
And also, I would like the man in that situation to somehow go through some equivalent risk there. Like, fine, I'll get on board with that. So let's develop the technology or something where men get, like, I don't know, a balloon in their stomach that gradually expands their skin, or like, I want some equivalent risk. Why do I have to bear all of the risk and responsibility for that, and then have, like, my body all messed up for the rest of my life? Sorry, Doug. I'm going back to the equality argument.
You know what? I just feel myself quietly transforming into Jordan Peterson inside my brain right now. I'm going to just not respond.
Mm-hmm.
There are arguments I could make, which I'm refraining from because I do not trust the impulse behind them. But I guess I will say this, which is just that earlier, someone else said, not me, I didn't come up with this. Someone else in the chat said, should I be charged with, should I be allowed to drive drunk because of my bodily autonomy? And it strikes me that in the context of the consequences of sex, to say, oh, well, you can't penalize everyone the same way by enforcing, by barring abortion because it's different from everyone. It's not that someone is saying, look, hundreds of thousands of people drive drunk all the time. There aren't accidents. Some people handle their liquor better than others. You can't ask people to be responsible for what is actually really arbitrary. It's still nonetheless a predictable consequence of driving drunk that some portion of the time, a statistically predictable portion of the time, you're going to have an accident and maybe even cost someone their life. So I would say, it's different for everyone. Everyone has the different likelihood of becoming pregnant, but nonetheless, it is a predictable consequence of sex to become pregnant, and that comes with some sort of obligation or responsibility, especially if we grant the fetus as a human. I mean, that's one of the reasons why people don't want to grant that, is because of the complication that arises from that. Oh my God, I'm so canceled. I'm gonna go cancel myself in the other room right now. But go ahead, respond, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I find that kind of a facile analogy, the drunk driving analogy. And I would also add that look, like the three of us and probably most people watching Sublation Media at home have been given adequate sex education and are aware of what the risks are and how common pregnancy happens, et cetera, et cetera. Sex is an emergent behavior that happens to many people when they are quite young. And there's also many people who never receive anything resembling adequate sex education, including how to enjoy sex without the risk of a pregnancy. And it seems to me that if you sort of just say, hey, sex has consequences and you have to live with them, you're sort of applying an ignorance tax to people who have not had the opportunity to learn how to safely have sex without risking a pregnancy. And it becomes just another burden that people who have less social capital have to deal with that's greater than those who have more social capital.
Yeah. Listen, you had a hard out at 9:50 and it's 9:52.
Gotta read, yeah.
Yeah. So, Freddie, thank you for coming by. And I hope that I am not canceled and that we can have you on again sometime.
Good luck, Doug, with not getting canceled. Thanks, guys. Right. Thanks, Ashley.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right. So, that
was
anymore,
Doug. You're canceled. I'm now taking over as CEO of Sublation. No, you're the brains of the outfit. Come back.
Okay, I'm back. So, I want to say something to you, because you said, I wish that men could feel the consequences of pregnancy like women do, and I don't blame you for saying that. But I'll just point out that because men don't, is this is like what Shrimla Firestone wanted, right? To escape from the biological determinism of gender or sex, and to create conditions exactly so that there wouldn't be this biological imperative to give birth, we'd create artificial wombs and alternatives to straightforward sexual reproduction. And I'm all for that. I'd love to see that happen, but I love sci-fi in general. But until then, I guess it just seems like there's this fundamental inequality built into reality based on biology. And all of these rules and laws that we come up with are attempts to overcome that fundamental inequality. And I guess protecting the right to abortion would be one way, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or all of us joining, the Catholic Church and just abiding and abstaining and leading trad lives. That would be another way too.
Yeah, that's exactly that. So yeah, men should have to face, I don't know, they should
self-canceling.
They should
again.
kind of very careful. There should be very careful control of male sexuality in society, because every time they ejaculate, they should be fully aware that the potential for millions of babies is in each. And there should be strict control of that, just to match what we have.
I know. I agree that, and young boys' hands should be tied to the side of the bed so they don't self-abuse. This is my position. I'll stand by that. All right. I think this has gone well off the rails now. At least I have. Can we bring
No,
Mark?
I think I've actually found a solution for the problem. So I think it's a very productive conversation.
All right.
But what we are going to go more deeply into it in the after party, unless there is something else that you wanted to add. One thing that we didn't talk about this week that was a really big issue, at least maybe it wasn't as much in the U.S., even though it happened in the U.S., was obviously Salman Rushdie. So that was something that I was hoping we could talk about in the patrons only section.
Yeah, I my only response to that is it's horrible, and I hope he's okay. And you know, it's in a way it's kind of amazing. It hasn't happened before now, but yeah, let's talk about Salman Rushdie and abortion and see if I can start to repair the damage I did to myself in this.
No, I know. I think these are really good questions because this is not, I said this before, this is not my area of expertise by a long shot. And so, you know, I give like one lecture on this. So this is all I got are just a few arguments. So it's really helpful for everybody to really exercise yourself in this kind of debate, because a part of what I think happened was that we got complacent. And it was long known that Roe v. Wade was not a very powerful, it was a very flimsy way of upholding abortion rights, and that it needed to be superseded by something else. And the opportunity to do so was missed many, many times. And we can never allow ourselves to lose track of why we have something, why we have what we have, because what's going to happen is it gets taken away, and we don't have the tools available to us to argue and to win it back.
Yeah, in the parent room, I want to start out the conversation by saying something I didn't say to Freddie, which occurred to me. It was another one of those moments where I was like, do I really want to be the most conservative guy on the stream? Do I really want to be in that position? But it did occur to me that, you know, one of the reasons why we ended up in a legal technicality securing these abortion rights is because there wasn't a clear enough political will from the electorate for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party to decide to try to enact it through law, that had political consequences that neither party wanted to fully take on. There at least there were enough Democrats who felt their constituents would feel betrayed by that they couldn't muster the political support needed. I mean, at least that's theoretically what happened. In which case, you know, more political work and organizing and education and understanding needs to be done, I think, on the issue. And we can start that in the parent room, be around 10:20. We'll start that for patrons only. And we'll release that also as an audio podcast. Thank you, everybody, for showing up for our live stream. Send your emails of complaint to Spencer Leonard at sublationmedia.com. And we'll see you next week.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants